Hello and welcome to week two. This video is the lecture for week two, and this week we continue to look at Made to Flourish. Hopefully, you're enjoying this book, have it underlined a lot. It's been a huge resource for me over the last 4 or 5 years since it came out. Also, we'll be introducing Tony Morgan's book, The Unstuck Church. This is a popular press book that really has a lot of research-oriented material in it, even though it's not based on research. Tony is not a senior pastor, but he talked about equipping the churches for sustained health. And he's never pastored a church, but he has led many organizations and looked at the life cycle. Life cycle theory is pretty normalized in our culture today. Everything has a life cycle to it. I am now in my 60s, and there are things that I used to be able to do when I was even 40. I mean, I used to be able to work outside all day and chop trees down and chop wood, and I can do all that now. It's just there's significant amount of soreness afterwards. And I pace myself a little differently now than I did when I was 40 and 50. All of us have a life cycle. And so do churches, so do organizations. And it's important when you oversee an organization, a church specifically, that you understand the life cycles of that church, can assess the life cycles. Sometimes the person that struggles the most to assess a life cycle are the people in the culture, because they don't really see where it really is. And I know, being a church planter, we had a lot of momentum, kind of the launch. We kind of inherited a church and launched a church at the same time. There's a group of people that wanted to start a church, but they all had a culture. They met together for a couple of years beforehand, and they were a loosely fit group of people. And so we together kind of launched this church in Indiana. And boy, the launch phase was confusing and fun and filled with strategy and vision. And I would say the first 5 years of that church was the funnest years of my life in ministry. It was so much fun, and there was momentum and growth. But then we kind of reached a place where we could really put a lot of systems in place for sustained health. And then we also reached several times in my 16 years of pastoring that church. We went through the growth cycle, but then we kind of plateaued and we started heading down. The great thing about even looking at these life cycles is we can have rebirths. I'm not even talking about changing the new name, firing all the staff or whatever. Not talking about radical change, just some things to tweak the church and the system and the organization to kind of go on a new pathway. And we saw that several times when I was pastoring, so I'm pretty familiar with the life cycle. It's pretty set in research as well. Organizations study these kind of things. And what Tony Morgan asserts is the stages are the launch cycle, the momentum or growth cycle, the strategic growth, where you start putting systems in place, and then a sustained health period where there's not a lot of battles that you're facing. You just look back and say, this is good, this is fun. And then all of a sudden you come into maintenance. Now you have to maintain where you are. I found that a lot of church planters, after the first 5 or 10 years, they kind of grew out of their skill set. Their skill set was to pioneer or plant, and now they have to find new skill set if they're going to pastor and shepherd a congregation. And then sometimes churches find themselves in preservation stage, where they're preserving what was, trying to keep it going what was, and yet our culture changes so fast that they have to discover who the new church is or who the new organization should be. And oftentimes churches fall to this point of life support. I had the responsibility to transition churches before, and it's kind of a sad thing where you study a history of the church, and that history may be 90 years, maybe 50 years, whatever. And they had all of this because all churches do. And then they had this, and there wasn't an intervention or several interventions along the pathway. And sometimes they come to the place where they're on life support. It's a hospice situation, and there's nothing anybody can do to revive that church. That's why it's so important when it starts the decline. And I'm not talking about attendance. I'm talking about some of it is just vision and values and all those things that go along with leading an organization. And sometimes we just get tired. We get tired of battles, and we don't want to fight new changes and or fight with people when we do change. And so slowly we can kind of drift in life support. And oftentimes a church that is on life support, you can't tell financially because they're in doubt. And they have some savings or somebody left them money. And so they can sustain that life support style for a long, long time. And it's very sad when you've seen a church like this. And I wouldn't even say it's the leader's fault. I would say oftentimes it's the people that should be doing the intervention, a board, if you're a board operator church, or a council, or in the structure that I'm familiar with, a district supervisor or a national office has some interventions. There is a time when a church declines to a certain part that the leader that's there can't take them to the new. And there are times like that, and it's very hard to navigate those times. So, but it's important that we understand that everything has a life cycle to it. I've had the privilege of seeing churches planted, but I've also had the disappointment of having to close churches. We've even had to close church plants before. And those are always difficult. And by the way, just so you know, none of the churches that the Apostle Paul planted are still in operation today. So everything has a life cycle. But it's important that we study those life cycles, and that's a very big part of change. At the end of this week, you'll be asked to look at a case study. And the case study really is designed with these life cycles and flourishing things involved. It had to do with a leadership transition, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Read that thoroughly several times and then begin to diagnose. There's an outline there that would help you put it all together. But use the course materials for the week. We realize you don't have a lot of resources yet. You can certainly look at the other resources that are in the course description. Again, life cycle is very familiar to those who have looked into research. All you have to do is Google life cycle of an organization, and they'll have a lot of clues on how to assess. This book will talk about assessing it as well. So hope you have a great week. Praying for you this week. Let me know if you have any struggles. God bless.